Hello, dear friends. Today, I'm gonna share a story that made me see myself and my life in a whole new light, leaving a mark I'm still trying to figure out. Get comfy, grab some tea or cold lemonade, and come along for this day. It's gonna be full of emotions, I promise. My name's Evan Logan, I'm 30 years old, and I'm a copywriter from Phoenix, Arizona. I write copy for ad campaigns, but to be honest, the last few years, my life's felt like a rough draft nobody reads. 4 years ago, I divorced my wife, Lindsay, and now she lives in Tucson, working as a nurse in a hospital. I'm on my own, and besides work, there's not much going on in my world. But everything changed when Ryan Kelly, my best friend from college, rolled into Phoenix. Ryan and I were inseparable at the University of Arizona. We shared a dorm room, threw wild parties, flirted with girls, and made big plans for the future. He was the guy who lit up any crowd with his energy, and I was the one adding some structure and ideas to our adventures. After graduation, we went our separate ways. Ryan became an engineer in Albuquerque, and I stayed in Phoenix, diving into work. We texted every now and then, swapping memes or quick messages, but we hadn't had a real hangout in years. When he messaged that he was coming to town for work, I jumped at the chance to meet up and spend a day at Lake Pleasant, our go-to spot back in college, where we'd chill after exams. That morning, I pulled up to his motel in my old Jeep, which has seen better days. Ryan was waiting outside, in a gray t-shirt and shorts, with a light bag slung over his shoulder. He looked almost the same, tall, chestnut hair slightly sun-bleached, and that familiar smile, but there was a new depth in his eyes, maybe tiredness or something heavier. "Evan man, it's been forever," he said, giving me a tight hug like we'd just seen each other yesterday. His voice was warm, and I felt nostalgia hit me hard. "Ready to step back in time?" I asked, opening the passenger door. He laughed. "With you? Always down, let's make it happen." We tossed a bag with sandwiches, water, and towels in the back. I turned on the radio, and classic rock filled the cab, bringing back memories of nights when we'd belt out these songs, speeding down the highway. The road to Lake Pleasant wound through Arizona's desert landscapes, past cacti, red rocks, and the occasional gas station. I tried to get Ryan talking, asking about his projects, how life's going in Albuquerque, but he kept his answers short, with a small smile. "Work's fine, same old stuff. Just happy to be here," he said, staring out at the passing hills. His tone was friendly, but I could tell he was holding something back, and it made me a little uneasy. Maybe he's just wiped from the flight, I thought. As we left the city behind, Ryan put his phone down and turned to me. "Remember how we'd ditch class and head to this lake after finals, chugging cheap beer?" he asked, his face lighting up with a genuine grin. I laughed, picturing it. "Yeah, and nearly got your stupid motorcycle stuck in the mud." We started swapping old stories, like the time we stole a cart from the dining hall or tried to impress girls at a party, and the tension between us began to melt away. But his long looks, the slight sadness in his voice when he talked about the past, made me wonder what he wasn't saying. We pulled up to the lake, and I breathed in the warm air, smelling of water, grass, and sun. This day was supposed to be a simple reunion, a chance to laugh and relive the good times. I had no idea it would lead to a moment we'd both choose to leave behind, but one that would stay with me forever. When we got to Lake Pleasant, the sun was already high, flooding everything with bright light that bounced off the water like a mirror. I parked the Jeep on the gravel lot, and Ryan and I started unloading our stuff from the back. The air was warm, smelling of sun-baked grass and a faint dampness from the lake, and I felt the stress of the past few weeks start to slip away. Ryan grabbed the bag with food, I took the towels and a foldable umbrella, and we headed to the shore, where a few families and couples were already set up. "Feels like old times, huh?" I said, nodding toward the water where people were swimming. Ryan smiled, just missing the beer and our crappy boombox. We picked a spot on the grass, close to the water but not too crowded. I jammed the umbrella into the ground for some shade, and Ryan spread out a big blue towel I'd grabbed from home. We peeled off our shirts, down to our shorts, ready to chill. I watched Ryan as he pulled water bottles from the bag, noticing how he'd changed over the years. His shoulders were broader, his skin a little tanned, but there was a new carefulness in his movements. You hitting the gym or what? I asked, trying to keep it light. He smirked, shrugging. Sometimes lift weights to avoid rotting at the drafting table. I lay back on the towel, hands behind my head, staring at the clouds drifting over the lake. I wanted to just lie there and not think about anything, but the silence between us started feeling heavy again. Ryan sat nearby, knees pulled up, staring at the water like it held some kind of answer. You're kinda quiet today, I said, turning to him. He looked at me, and his eyes lingered on my face for a second. Just thinking. Got a lot on my mind, he said, his voice softer than usual. I wanted to ask what was bothering him, but I didn't push. We were just getting started. The sun was getting intense, and I realized I'd forgotten sunscreen. Hey, help me out here or I'll burn in 10 minutes, I said, handing Ryan the tube. He took it and I turned my back, feeling his hands touch my shoulders. His fingers were warm, and he rubbed the cream in slowly, almost carefully, like he was afraid to mess up. My body tensed and it threw me off. What, you moonlighting as a masseuse? I joked, trying to break the mood. Ryan snorted, keep dreaming, Logan, just don't want you peeling like a lizard. We switched and I started putting sunscreen on his back. His skin was hot from the sun, and I noticed him flinch slightly when my fingers brushed his shoulder blades. It was weird, we'd never been shy around each other, but something felt different. I finished quickly and set the tube aside, trying not to overthink it. Ready for a swim? I asked, standing and brushing off my hands. Ryan nodded, but his gaze was kind of distant. We headed to the water, and I hoped the cool lake would wash away this strange tension that was starting to build. But deep down, I had a feeling this day wasn't going to be as simple as I'd planned. After a quick swim in the cool water of Lake Pleasant, Ryan and I headed back to the shore, feeling a bit lighter, like the water had washed away some of the weird tension that had been building. The sun was still blazing, and we sprawled out on the towel under the umbrella, letting the heat dry our bodies. I watched the way water droplets glistened on his skin, and caught myself staring a little too long. It wasn't the first time that day, and I quickly looked away, focusing on the lake. Nice to cool off, right? I said, trying to fill the quiet. Ryan nodded, rubbing his hair with a towel. Yeah, feels like we're 18 again, just without the hangover. We decided to take a walk along the shore to stretch our legs and maybe talk for real. The path wound through grass and rocks, curving around the lake, and we walked side by side, sometimes falling silent to listen to the water lapping or the gulls crying overhead. I could tell Ryan wanted to say something, but he was holding back. You okay? You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders, I said, nudging him with my elbow. He smiled, but it felt forced. Just thinking about life. Sometimes it feels like it's all going the wrong way, he said, his voice quieter than usual, almost vulnerable. We stopped at a small pier where the water was so clear you could see the rocks at the bottom. Ryan sat on the edge, dangling his legs, and I settled next to him, feeling the wooden planks warm under the sun. Our knees were almost touching, and I noticed his hand, resting on the pier, was so close to mine I could feel the heat of his skin. Remember hanging out here? You tried to teach me how to dive off the run, I said, trying to steer us back to easy memories. He laughed, his eyes lighting up, and you belly flopped every time, like a pancake hitting the pan. The laughter faded, and a new kind of silence settled in, not awkward, but warm, almost tangible. I turned to him and our eyes locked. His gaze, usually so confident, was soft now, and I felt my heart pick up speed. You ever miss those days? When everything was simpler? He asked, his voice catching slightly. I nodded, holding his stare. Every single day. But we're still here, aren't we? He leaned toward me just a bit, and his shoulder pressed against mine, the warmth of his body spreading across my skin, sending shivers through me despite the heat. The moment lasted only a second, but it felt so alive I forgot how to breathe. His fingers brushed my hand by accident, and it was like a spark, soft but strong enough to make my chest burn. I pulled back, laughing to cover my confusion. Dude, what? You auditioning for a rom-com now? Ryan grinned, but his eyes stayed serious. Maybe I would, if you were my co-star. It was a joke, but there was something else in it that made me pause. We got up and kept walking, but that warmth, that faint thrill, stayed with me, and I knew he felt it too. The lake sparkled, but something was igniting inside me, something I couldn't yet name. Ryan and I made our way back to our spot on the grass after the walk, and the air felt even hotter, though the sun was dipping toward the horizon, painting Lake Pleasant in golden hues. My heart was still beating faster than it should have after that moment on the pier, and I tried to convince myself it was just the heat or nostalgia. We sprawled out on the towel, and I pulled a couple of sandwiches from the bag to distract myself. "You still eat like you did in college?" I asked, handing him one with turkey. Ryan grinned, taking it. "If you mean I can scarf down anything, then yeah, nothing's changed." We ate, chatting about random stuff, work, how Phoenix has changed, old friends we haven't seen in forever. But every time his gaze lingered on me a little too long, I felt something tighten inside. His t-shirt clung to his body from the swim, outlining the shape of his chest, and I caught myself watching as he wiped a drop of water from his neck. It felt wrong, but I couldn't look away. "What are you staring at?" he asked with a sly smirk, and I felt my face heat up. "Just wondering how you're not fried in this sun," I said, dodging, looking out at the lake. We lay back on the towel, our shoulders almost touching, and I could feel the warmth of his body next to mine, even without contact. The silence between us grew thicker, like the air itself had gotten heavier. Ryan rolled onto his side, propping himself on an elbow, and looked at me. His face was so close I could see every eyelash, every shadow on his cheekbones. "You know, I sometimes wonder what things would have been like if we hadn't gone our separate ways," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. I swallowed, his words sinking deep. Maybe it'd be the same. "We'd still be hanging out, acting like idiots," I said, but my voice wavered. He reached out and brushed a blade of grass off my shoulder. His fingers lingered on my skin a moment too long, and a wave of heat shot down my spine, like a spark. His gaze was so intense I could almost feel its weight. "You ever think we could have been closer?" he asked, his words hanging in the air. I froze, not sure how to answer. My hand moved on its own, resting on his wrist, and I gently squeezed, feeling his pulse under my fingers. It was so intimate, so unexpected, that my breath caught. I pulled back, trying to play it off. "Dude, what, you practicing for some movie now?" But my smile felt forced, and Ryan didn't look away. "Maybe I am. But you wouldn't say no to a scene like that, would you?" he said, his voice low, with a slight rasp. We both laughed, but the laughter couldn't hide what was happening. I stood, stretching to break the moment. "Come on, let's hit the water again before it gets dark." But as we walked to the lake, I knew that warmth, that flutter in my chest, wasn't going anywhere. Something between us was shifting, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop it. The sun was almost gone, and Lake Pleasant shimmered with soft shades of orange and pink, catching the last rays of the day. Ryan and I climbed out of the water after our second swim, and my body buzzed with a mix of exhaustion and that unexplainable heat that had been building between us all day. We headed back to our towel, and I noticed how his wet shorts clung to his thighs, outlining every curve of his body. I looked away fast, trying to focus on something else, but my eyes kept drifting back to him. "Looks like we might stay here till midnight," I said, rubbing my hair with a towel to distract myself. Ryan smirked, sitting close. "And? Not such a bad deal, is it?" We sat near each other, shoulders almost brushing, and I could feel the warmth of his skin through the damp air. The silence around us grew almost tangible, charged with something I couldn't ignore anymore. Ryan turned to me, and his eyes, lit by the sunset, were so deep I felt my breath hitch. "Evan, can I say something?" he asked, his voice low, with a slight tremble. I nodded, though my chest tightened with anticipation. "Sometimes I think about you. Not just as a friend," he said, and his words hit me like a warm wave. I froze, staring at him, and saw his hand slowly reach for mine. His fingers slid over my own, so gentle, so achingly slow, that heat spread through my whole body. "Ryan, what are you saying?" I asked, but my voice came out rough, giving me away. He leaned closer, and I felt his breath on my cheek, warm and a little uneven. "Just, right now, here, I can't pretend I don't feel this," he whispered, his lips so close I could feel their heat. The world around us vanished. I didn't think, didn't analyze, I just gave in to the moment. My hand tightened on his, and I leaned in, letting our foreheads touch. His skin was hot, and I could feel his pulse racing in time with mine. We didn't speak, but our eyes said everything. This was more than friendship, more than we could put into words. His hand slid up my shoulder, and I shivered as his fingers traced along my neck, leaving trails of fire. It was so intimate, so wrong and so right at the same time, that I lost all sense of time. We pulled back, but not entirely. His hand stayed on my wrist, my fingers still brushing his. This can't happen again, right? I said, trying to ground myself. Ryan nodded, but his eyes held the same confusion as mine. Just once. To know what it's like, he whispered, and I knew he was right. We sat there, in the quiet of the sunset, holding hands, until the last light faded. That moment was ours, but we both knew it would stay here, by the lake, and we'd never go back to it again. The sunset over Lake Pleasant had faded, and the sky turned a deep blue, with the first stars twinkling above the water. Ryan and I sat on the towel, still reeling from the heat of each other after that moment that turned everything I thought I knew about us upside down. My fingers still trembled from his touch, and I tried not to look at him, afraid his gaze would pull me back into that abyss I'd just climbed out of. The air had cooled, but my body burned, like the sun was still searing my skin. We should probably start packing up, I said, trying to sound steady, but my voice betrayed me with a slight shake. Ryan nodded, but he didn't move, his hand still resting close to mine, so close I could feel its warmth. We started gathering our things, but our movements were slow, like neither of us wanted to break the silence that was heavy with what had just happened. I folded the towel, and Ryan tossed empty bottles into the bag. When he leaned down to grab the umbrella, his shoulder brushed mine, and a jolt shot down my spine. His skin was still damp from the lake, and I noticed a droplet slide down his neck, pausing at his collarbone. I swallowed, looking away, but he caught my stare and gave a small smile, not mocking, but soft, almost painfully tender. "You okay, Evan?" he asked, his voice so low I felt it vibrate in my chest. I nodded, but inside, everything was churning. That was unexpected," I said, struggling to find words. He stepped closer, and I felt his breath graze my cheek, warm and a little uneven. "It was for me too," he whispered, and his fingers lightly brushed my arm, like he couldn't help himself. That touch was so faint, but it sparked a fire in me I was trying to put out. I wanted to pull away, but instead, my fingers reached for his wrist, lingering there, feeling his pulse under my skin. We stood frozen, and I saw his eyes darken, reflecting the stars above us. This isn't us, right?" I said, but it came out more like a question. Ryan nodded, but his hand slowly slid over mine, lacing our fingers for a second before he let go. "It was just a moment. We can leave it here," he said, but his voice wavered, showing he was as shaken as I was. I felt guilt, but I couldn't deny that moment had been alive, real, in a way nothing had been for years. "Friends, yeah? Like before," I said, forcing a smile. He looked at me, his lips twitching into a faint smile. "Always, Evan. But you know that was special." We finished packing, but every glance, every accidental brush as we walked to the car, reminded me of what had happened. I knew we'd agreed to forget it, but his scent, the warmth of his skin, still lingered in me, and I wasn't sure I could fully let it go. The stars shone brighter, but inside, I was dark with questions I didn't have answers to. Night had fully settled over Lake Pleasant, and the stars reflected in the dark water, making it feel like we were standing at the edge of the cosmos. Ryan and I finished packing and walked slowly to my Jeep, parked on the gravel lot. Each step echoed in my chest, like it was trying to hold on to the moment we decided to leave behind. The air was cool, but my body still carried the warmth of his touch, and I caught myself walking closer to him than necessary, feeling his presence even without words. "Good day, huh?" I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice was too quiet. Ryan glanced at me, his eyes catching the moonlight. "Yeah, better than I expected." We reached the car, and I opened the trunk to toss in the bag and towels. Ryan stood close, and when I turned to take the umbrella from him, our hands brushed. His fingers were cool from the night air, but their touch burned me like fire. I froze, and he didn't pull away, letting our hands linger longer than they should have. His gaze was heavy, almost tangible, and my breathing grew uneven. "Evan, you sure we're doing the right thing?" he asked, his voice rough, like the words were hard to get out. I swallowed, feeling his closeness pull me like a magnet. He stepped nearer, and I felt the warmth of his body despite the night's chill. His shoulder pressed lightly against mine, and I noticed how his chest rose and fell, like he was fighting himself too. "We said it was a one-time thing," I replied, but my words lacked conviction, and I couldn't stop staring at his lips, so close I could almost taste them. His hand rose slowly, and he touched my cheek, his thumb tracing softly along my jaw. It was so gentle, so painfully intimate, that I shivered, heat spreading through my whole body. I leaned in a fraction, our foreheads nearly touching, like they had at sunset. His breath mingled with mine, warm and a little shaky, and I felt his fingers slide to my neck, resting where my pulse raced. "Just give me one more second of this," he whispered, and I couldn't resist. My hand settled on his waist, feeling the firmness of his body under the thin fabric of his shirt, and I pulled him slightly closer, letting our bodies meld for a fleeting moment in this quiet, forbidden dance. It wasn't a kiss, but it was more, a moment where the lines between us dissolved. We pulled apart, and I saw the same mix of guilt and desire in his eyes that was tearing at me. "We're friends, Ryan. That's not changing," I said, trying to convince us both. He nodded, but his hand lingered on my shoulder before he stepped back. "You're right. But I won't forget this day," he said, his voice full of quiet honesty. We got in the car and I started the engine, but as I glanced at the lake one last time, I knew that moment, that thrill, would stay with me, even if we never spoke of it again. The Jeep's engine hummed softly as Ryan and I drove back to Phoenix, leaving Lake Pleasant behind. The night had swallowed Arizona's desert landscape, with only the headlights catching cacti and the occasional road sign. I gripped the wheel, but my focus kept drifting to Ryan, sitting beside me, staring out the window. His profile, lit by the faint glow of the dashboard, felt so familiar yet somehow new, like I was seeing him clearly for the first time. The moment at the lake still pulsed in me, and I could feel his warmth, his breath, lingering on my skin. "You good?" I asked, trying to break the silence that had grown too heavy. He turned to me, his eyes glinting. "Yeah, just processing everything." I turned on the radio, and a quiet old rock tune filled the cab, but even that couldn't drown out what was happening between us. Ryan leaned slightly toward me, and I felt his hand brush mine on the gearshift, accidental but warm. His fingers lingered, light but deliberate, and my heart kicked up again. "Evan, you ever think we could have been more?" he asked, his voice so soft I almost missed it over the music. I swallowed, keeping my eyes on the road, but my fingers tightened around his for a second before letting go. "Maybe I did. But we're friends, Ryan. That's what matters," I said, but it sounded like I was trying to convince myself. He nodded, but his hand slowly trailed up my forearm, leaving a wake of goosebumps. It was so intimate, so unexpected, that I nearly veered onto the shoulder. "You're right. But this day, it was real," he said, his voice trembling with honesty. I glanced at him, and his eyes, full of starlight, were so close I felt the air between us thicken. My hand reached for his shoulder, squeezing lightly, feeling the warmth of his body through his shirt. It was just a friendly gesture, but in that moment, it felt like more than we could admit. We fell quiet, and the road stretched on endlessly until Phoenix's lights flickered in the distance. Ryan suddenly laughed, and I looked at him, startled. "Just remembered how we stole that stupid flag from campus?" he said, his laugh so light I couldn't help but join in. We started swapping old stories, and the tension began to dissolve, like we were back to being just friends, the way we'd always been. But deep down, I knew this day had changed us, even if we never spoke of it. When we pulled up to his motel, Ryan turned to me. "Evan, thanks for today. It was unforgettable," he said, his smile warm but tinged with sadness. I nodded, a lump in my throat making it hard to speak. "Anytime, man." "See you," I said, but as he got out, I noticed him pause and look back through the window. His gaze was so long I almost thought he'd come back. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving me with the sense that something vital had gone unsaid. When I got home and opened my phone to text Ryan, I saw a message from him, sent back at the lake but undelivered due to bad signal. Evan, I'm moving to Seattle. New project, new life. Sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Today was goodbye. I froze, staring at the screen, realizing this day wasn't just a moment we chose to forget, it was the last time we'd see each other. He was gone, and I was left with questions I'd never get to ask. Friends, what would you have done in my shoes? Should I have stopped Ryan and talked about what happened, or did we do the right thing leaving it behind? And how would you feel, finding out it was a forever goodbye? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear what you think.